Introduction: The story of Joseph in Egypt. The story of Joseph is one of the most powerful and emotional stories in the Bible. It is not only a story about a man, but also about faith, forgiveness, and the mysterious plan of God. Joseph lived more than 3,000 years ago, but his journey still speaks to us today. He was a young man who faced betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and prison. Yet, through all of this, he trusted in God and never gave up. At the beginning, Joseph was just a teenager, the son of Jacob, living with his family in the land of Canaan. He was loved by his father more than the others, and this created jealousy among his brothers. This jealousy would change his life forever. But what is amazing about Joseph's story is that every difficulty, every trial, and every painful moment was used by God for a greater purpose. What seemed like tragedy became the door to victory. What looked like defeat became the path to salvation for many people. Joseph's story teaches us that even when life feels unfair, even when people hurt us, and even when we are left alone, God is still writing our story. He is able to turn pain into blessing and tears into joy. As we go through the story step by step, you will see how a young man, sold as a slave, became the governor of the most powerful nation in the world. You will see how he forgave those who betrayed him, and how God used his life to save not only his family, but also entire nations. This story is about trust, patience, and the power of forgiveness. It is about a God who works behind the scenes, even when we cannot see him. And it is about the truth that no suffering is wasted when we put our lives in his hands. So let us begin the journey of Joseph in Egypt, and discover how his faith turned the darkest moments into a story of hope for the world. Part 1: A Beloved Son. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, but he was special. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children. This was not a secret, everyone could see it. To show his love, Jacob gave Joseph a beautiful coat. It was a long robe with many colors, a rare and precious gift in those days. When Joseph wore it, everyone knew that he was the favorite son. But this gift created a problem. Joseph's brothers became jealous. They saw the colorful coat and felt anger in their hearts. They asked themselves, "Why does father love him more than us?" Joseph was also different in his personality. He was honest, sometimes too honest. When his brothers did something wrong, Joseph told his father. This made them dislike him even more. Another reason for the jealousy was Joseph's dreams. One night, Joseph dreamed that he and his brothers were tying bundles of grain in the field. In the dream, his bundle stood tall, and the bundles of his brothers bowed down to it. When Joseph told them about this dream, they became very angry. "Do you think you will rule over us?" Later, Joseph had another dream. This time, he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. He told his father and brothers, and even Jacob was surprised. "What is this dream? Will your mother and I and your brothers really bow to you?" These dreams came from God, but at that moment, no one understood. To his brothers, the dreams were only another reason to hate Joseph. Day by day, their jealousy grew stronger, like a fire that could not be controlled. Joseph, however, was innocent. He was young, only 17 years old, and he could not imagine what was about to happen. He simply lived as a beloved son, enjoying the special place he had in his father's heart. But this love and this favor would soon bring him great suffering. The story of Joseph as the beloved son shows us something important. When God has a plan for someone, it may create jealousy or opposition. But no matter how others feel, God's plan will never fail. Part 2: Betrayed by his brothers. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers. They were far away, taking care of the family's sheep. Joseph obeyed his father and began the long journey. When the brothers saw Joseph coming in the distance, their anger returned. The colorful coat shone in the sunlight, reminding them of their jealousy. They whispered to each other, "Here comes the dreamer." At that moment, jealousy turned into hatred. Some of them said, "Let's kill him and throw him into a pit. Then we can say that a wild animal ate him." But Reuben, the oldest brother, did not agree. He wanted to save Joseph later. So he said, "Do not kill him. Just throw him into this empty pit." When Joseph arrived, the brothers grabbed him. They tore off his beautiful coat and pushed him into the pit. The pit was deep and had no water. Joseph was trapped, alone and afraid. While they were eating, a caravan of traders passed by. These men were traveling to Egypt with camels loaded with spices and goods. Judah, another brother, had an idea. "Why should we kill Joseph? Let's sell him to these traders. Then we will be rid of him without blood on our hands." The brothers agreed. They pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. The traders tied Joseph and led him away, step by step, toward Egypt. After this, the brothers took Joseph's coat, dipped it in goat's blood, and brought it to their father. When Jacob saw it, he cried out in pain, "A wild animal has killed my son." He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for many days. No one could comfort him. Meanwhile, Joseph walked as a slave toward a foreign land. His heart was heavy. He had lost his family, his freedom, and his home. But even in that dark moment, God was still with him. This betrayal was only the beginning of a much greater plan. Part 3. A Slave in Egypt. Joseph arrived in Egypt, a land full of pyramids, temples, and powerful rulers. For a young Hebrew boy, everything looked strange and frightening. The language was different, the gods were different, and the people treated him like property. The traders sold Joseph to a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was a captain of Pharaoh's guard, a man with great authority. Joseph became his slave, working in his house and fields. At first, Joseph's life seemed hopeless. He had no rights, no freedom, and no family. But Joseph remembered the God of his father Jacob. He prayed, trusted, and worked with all his strength. The Lord was with Joseph, and everything he did was successful. When Joseph managed the household, the animals grew strong and the crops flourished. When he organized the servants, the work was done quickly and well. Potiphar noticed this. He saw that Joseph was different, honest, wise, and faithful. Soon, Potiphar trusted Joseph with more and more responsibilities. Finally, Joseph was put in charge of everything in the house. Potiphar did not worry about anything, except the food he ate. Joseph, the slave, had become a trusted manager. It was clear that God's blessing followed him, even in a foreign land. But not everyone in Potiphar's house was happy. Potiphar's wife began to notice Joseph, not for his work, but for his appearance. The Bible says Joseph was well-built and handsome. Day after day, she tried to tempt him, but Joseph refused. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" he said. He remained faithful, even when no one was watching. Joseph's time in Potiphar's house teaches us something important. Even in the lowest places, God can lift us up. Faithfulness in small things prepares us for greater things. Part 4. Falsely Accused. Potiphar's wife was not willing to give up. Day after day, she tried to convince Joseph to lie with her. But Joseph remained firm. He respected Potiphar, and above all, he feared God. One day, when the house was empty, she grabbed Joseph by his cloak. "Come with me," she said. Joseph pulled away quickly and ran outside. But in his escape, he left his cloak in her hands. Humiliated and angry, she decided to take revenge. She screamed and called the other servants. Holding Joseph's cloak, she accused him. "This Hebrew slave tried to attack me. See, here's his cloak." When Potiphar came home, she repeated the story. She showed him the cloak and demanded punishment. Potiphar was furious. Without asking Joseph to explain, he ordered him to be thrown into prison. For Joseph, it was another injustice. First, betrayed by his brothers, then sold as a slave, now accused of crime he did not commit. From the pit in Canaan to the prison in Egypt, his life seemed to fall lower and lower. But even in prison, God was with him. The Lord gave Joseph strength, wisdom, and peace in his heart. The prison keeper soon noticed Joseph's good character. Step by step, Joseph was put in charge of the other prisoners. Once again, even in chains, Joseph rose to a position of trust. This dark chapter reminds us, sometimes the world may accuse us unfairly, but God sees the truth, and his plan is greater than human lies. Part 5, Dreams in Prison. In prison, Joseph met many people. He worked hard, spoke kindly, and trusted that God was still with him. One day, 2 important men were sent to the prison. They were servants of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. One was Pharaoh's cupbearer, the man who tasted the king's wine to make sure it was safe. The other was Pharaoh's baker, the man responsible for preparing bread for the royal table. Both men had offended Pharaoh and were waiting for judgment. During the night, each of them had a strange dream. The next morning, they were troubled and confused. Joseph noticed their sad faces and asked, "Why are you so downcast today?" They answered, "We both had dreams, but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph said, "Interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer spoke first. "In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches. It budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. I had Pharaoh's cup in my hand, and I squeezed the grapes into it and gave it to Pharaoh." Joseph listened carefully and replied, "This is the meaning. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position. You will put his cup in his hand again." Then Joseph added, "When this happens, please remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh so that I may get out of this prison." Next, the baker shared his dream. "In my dream, I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. The top basket was full of baked goods for Pharaoh, but birds came and ate them." Joseph looked serious. "This is the meaning," he said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head, but he will hang you, and the birds will eat your flesh." 3 days later, Pharaoh celebrated his birthday. He restored the cupbearer to his position, just as Joseph said, but the baker was executed, exactly as Joseph had warned. The dreams prove that Joseph spoke with wisdom from God, but sadly, the cupbearer forgot Joseph. He did not mention him to Pharaoh. Part 6, Pharaoh's Dreams. 2 full years passed after the cupbearer returned to his position. Joseph was still in prison, forgotten by men, but not forgotten by God. One night, Pharaoh himself had 2 strange dreams. In the first dream, he was standing by the Nile River. 7 fat, healthy cows came up out of the water and began to eat grass. Then 7 thin, ugly cows came out of the river. They stood beside the healthy cows, and then they ate them. But even after eating, the thin cows looked just as ugly and weak as before. Pharaoh woke up, troubled. Then he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 thin heads of grain, dried by the east wind, sprouted. The thin heads swallowed up the healthy ones. In the morning, Pharaoh was deeply disturbed. He called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. He told them his dreams, but none of them could explain their meaning. It was then that the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. He said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my mistakes. 2 years ago, when you were angry with me and the baker, we were in prison. Each of us had a dream, and a young Hebrew interpreted them. What he said came true exactly, just as he predicted." Pharaoh quickly sent for Joseph. They brought him out of the prison, shaved him, and gave him clean clothes. Soon Joseph stood before the most powerful man in Egypt. Pharaoh said, "I had dreams, and no one can interpret them, but I hear that you can." Joseph replied with humility, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." With those words, Joseph prepared to reveal a message that would change the future of Egypt and the entire region. Part 7, Joseph rises to power. Pharaoh told Joseph his 2 dreams. Joseph listened carefully and then spoke with confidence. Both dreams mean the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years of plenty. After them, the 7 thin cows and the 7 weak heads of grain are 7 years of famine. God has shown you twice because the matter is firmly decided, and it will happen soon. Joseph then gave advice. Pharaoh should choose a wise and discerning man. He must put him in charge of the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty, Let him collect 1/5 of the harvest and store it in the cities. That way, when the 7 years of famine come, Egypt will have food and will not be destroyed." Pharaoh listened carefully. Then he spoke in front of all his officials. "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Turning directly to Joseph, Pharaoh declared, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so wise and discerning as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people will obey your word. Only in respect to the throne will I be greater than you." In that moment, Joseph went from prisoner to ruler. Pharaoh gave him his signet ring, fine linen clothes, and a gold chain around his neck. He rode in a royal chariot, and people shouted before him, "Make way." Pharaoh also gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah, and he gave him a wife named Asenath. Joseph was only 30 years old when he began to serve in Pharaoh's court. For 7 years, the land produced food in abundance. Joseph traveled through Egypt, collecting grain and storing it in great cities. The harvest was so great that he stopped counting. It was like the sand of the sea. God had turned Joseph's suffering into honor. The boy who had been betrayed by his brothers and sold as a slave was now the second most powerful man in Egypt. Part 8, the famine begins. Just as Joseph had said, 7 years of abundance came to Egypt. The fields produced more grain than anyone had ever seen before. Year after year, the barns and storehouses filled until they were overflowing. Joseph organized everything with great wisdom. He made sure that every city stored food from its own fields. This way, when the famine came, people would not need to travel far for bread. Egypt was ready because God had given Joseph understanding. Then, just as Joseph had warned, the 7 years of famine began. The rain stopped, the sun grew hotter, and the fields became dry. Nothing grew. Slowly, hunger spread across the land. But in Egypt there was food. The people came to Pharaoh and cried out for bread. Pharaoh told them, "Go to Joseph. Do whatever he tells you." So Joseph opened the storehouses. He sold grain to the Egyptians, and the people had food to eat. The famine was not only in Egypt. It spread to all the surrounding lands. From Canaan to Ethiopia, people began to suffer. Families searched for food, but the ground was empty. News spread that Egypt still had grain, so people from many nations traveled there to buy food from Joseph. Joseph's wisdom was now saving not just Egypt, but the whole region. God had placed him in that position for a purpose. The dreams that once made his brothers angry were slowly beginning to come true. Part 9. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt. In the land of Canaan, Jacob and his sons also felt the famine. The fields were empty, and the animals had little to eat. The family began to run out of food. One day, Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt. He called his sons and said, "Why do you just keep looking at each other? I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers made the long journey to Egypt. Benjamin, the youngest son, stayed home with Jacob because Jacob was afraid of losing him. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they were brought to Joseph, but they did not recognize him. Years had passed, and Joseph now looked like an Egyptian ruler, wearing fine clothes and speaking their language through an interpreter. The brothers bowed down before him, their faces to the ground. Joseph remembered his dreams from long ago, the dreams of his brothers bowing down to him. Now they were coming true, but Joseph did not reveal who he was. Instead, he spoke harshly to test them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. They answered, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Joseph accused them. "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is weak." They replied quickly, "No, my lord. We are honest men. We are all sons of one father. There were 12 of us, but one is no more, and the youngest is now with our father." Joseph listened, but he continued his test. He put them in prison for 3 days. Then he said, "If you are honest men, leave one of your brothers here in prison. The rest of you may go and take grain back for your hungry families. But you must bring your youngest brother to me. Then I will know you are telling the truth." The brothers agreed. They felt guilt for what they had done to Joseph long ago. They whispered among themselves, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded for his life, but we would not listen. That is why this trouble has come upon us." They did not know that Joseph could understand them, because he had been speaking through an interpreter. Hearing their words, Joseph turned away and wept. Then he chose Simeon to stay in prison, and the others returned home with sacks of grain. Part 10. The Second Journey to Egypt. The brothers returned to Canaan with grain, but also with fear. When they opened their sacks, they found that the money they had paid was inside again. They were terrified, thinking this was a trap. Jacob, their father, was also afraid. He said, "You have robbed me of my children. Joseph is no more, and now Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." But as the famine grew worse, their food began to run out again. Jacob told them, "Go back and buy us a little more food." Judah replied, "The man warned us clearly. You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you send Benjamin with us, we will go. But if you will not send him, we will not go." Jacob resisted, but hunger was stronger than fear. Finally, he agreed to let Benjamin go. He prayed that God Almighty would grant them mercy before the ruler of Egypt. He also told them to take gifts, balm, honey, spices, and almonds, as well as double the silver, in case there had been a mistake with the payments. So the brothers went back to Egypt, this time with Benjamin. When Joseph saw them, and especially Benjamin, his heart was deeply moved. He ordered his servant to prepare a feast. The brothers were afraid. They thought Joseph would accuse them of stealing the money and make them slaves. But instead, Joseph welcomed them kindly. He asked about their father and saw Benjamin with his own eyes. Overcome with emotion, Joseph hurried out of the room and wept. After washing his face, he returned and controlled himself. He seated his brothers at the table in order of their birth. They were amazed, wondering how this Egyptian ruler knew their ages. Food was served, and Benjamin received 5 times as much as the others. The brothers ate and drank freely, not knowing that the greatest test was still to come. Part 11. The Final Test. After the meal, Joseph prepared one last test for his brothers. He ordered a steward to fill their sacks with food, and once again, to return their silver. But this time, Joseph gave a special command. "Put my silver cup in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, Benjamin's sack." The next morning, the brothers set out for home, happy and relieved. But before they had gone far, Joseph sent his steward after them. When he caught up with them, he accused them. "Why have you repaid good with evil? My master's silver cup is missing." The brothers were shocked. "Far be it from us to do such a thing," they answered. "If any of your servants is found with it, he will die, and the rest of us will become your slaves." The steward searched each sack, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. When he opened Benjamin's sack, there was the silver cup. The brothers tore their clothes in despair. Their hearts sank with fear, and they returned to the city. Before Joseph, Judah, and the others bowed down. Judah spoke, "God has uncovered our guilt. We are now my Lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found with the cup." But Joseph replied, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the one who was found with the cup will become my slave. The rest of you, go back to your father in peace." This was the final test. Would the brothers abandon Benjamin as they had once abandoned Joseph? Or would they stand together this time? Judah stepped forward with courage. He begged Joseph, "Please, my lord, let me remain as your slave in place of the boy. Let Benjamin return with his brothers. If I go back to my father without the boy, his life will be full of sorrow. He will die from grief. I cannot allow this to happen." Judah's words showed something new. The brothers had changed. They were no longer selfish and jealous. They were willing to sacrifice themselves for one another. Joseph now knew the truth. His brothers were not the same men who once sold him into slavery. Part 12. Joseph reveals himself. Joseph could no longer control his emotions. The room was filled with tension, and Judah's plea touched his heart deeply. Finally, Joseph shouted, Have everyone leave my presence." All the servants left, and only Joseph's brothers remained. Then Joseph broke down and wept so loudly that even Pharaoh's household heard about it. Through his tears, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers were stunned. They could not answer him because they were terrified. The ruler of Egypt standing before them was the very brother they had betrayed. Joseph called them closer. "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." He explained, "For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance." Tears filled the eyes of the brothers. The guilt of many years was heavy on them, but Joseph's words brought relief. He embraced Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him back. Then Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept over them. After this, they were finally able to talk with him. The reunion was powerful. The brothers who once hated Joseph now received forgiveness. The dreamer was no longer just a dreamer. He was the instrument God had used to save lives. Part 13. Joseph sends for his father Jacob. After Joseph revealed himself, he wanted to bring his whole family to safety. The famine was still severe, and 5 more years remained without harvest. So Joseph told his brothers, "Hurry back to my father and tell him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen, and be near me. You, your children, and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come." Joseph then gave them wagons, food for the journey, and new clothes. To Benjamin he gave even more, 5 sets of clothes and 300 pieces of silver. He also sent gifts to his father, 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys carrying grain, bread, and provisions for the trip. When the brothers returned to Canaan, they told Jacob the incredible news. Joseph is still alive. He is ruler of all Egypt. At first, Jacob was shocked and did not believe them. But when he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, his spirit revived. Jacob said, "I am convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Hope returned to the old man's heart. For many years, Jacob thought Joseph was gone forever. Now God was restoring his family in a way he could never have imagined. Part 14. Jacob moves to Egypt. Jacob prepared for the long journey to Egypt. It was not easy for an old man to leave the land of Canaan, the land God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob himself. But the famine was severe, and Joseph was waiting. Before leaving, Jacob stopped at Beersheba to offer sacrifices to God. That night, God spoke to him in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob." "Here I am," Jacob replied. God said, "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." Encouraged by this promise, Jacob continued the journey. His sons carried their families, livestock, and all their possessions in the wagons Joseph had sent. The whole family of Israel traveled together, 70 persons in total. When they arrived in Egypt, Joseph prepared to meet his father. As soon as he saw him, Joseph threw his arms around him and wept for a long time. Jacob said, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph then introduced his family to Pharaoh. Pharaoh welcomed them and gave them the best land in Egypt, the region of Goshen. It was a fertile place, perfect for their flocks and herds. So Jacob and his family settled in Egypt. They had food, land, and protection during the famine. The promise God had made to Jacob was beginning to unfold. His family would grow into a great nation. Part 15. Jacob's blessings and death. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. During that time, his family grew strong and healthy in the land of Goshen. Though he was far from Canaan, Jacob knew that God's promises were still true. When Jacob became old and weak, he called for Joseph. He asked him to swear an oath. "Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." Joseph agreed and promised to do so. Later, Jacob blessed Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Although Manasseh was the firstborn, Jacob crossed his hands and placed his right hand on Ephraim's head. Joseph tried to correct him, but Jacob said, "I know, my son, I know. Manasseh will also become great, but his younger brother will be greater. His descendants will become a group of nations." Then Jacob called all his sons and gave each one a blessing, or in some cases a warning. He spoke words about their future, telling them what would happen to their descendants. To Judah he said, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." This was a prophecy pointing to the coming of the Messiah. After blessing his sons, Jacob lay down in his bed. He gathered his feet onto the bed, breathed his last breath, and died peacefully. His sons mourned deeply, but they remembered Joseph's promise. Joseph asked Pharaoh for permission to bury his father in Canaan. Pharaoh agreed, and a great procession went up to the land. With chariots, horsemen, and many people, they carried Jacob to the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac were buried. There they laid him to rest. Jacob's death marked the end of an era, but the story of his family was far from over. The people of Israel would continue to grow, and God's plan would move forward through them. Part 16. Joseph's Forgiveness. After Jacob's death, Joseph's brothers became afraid once again. They thought to themselves, "What if Joseph is still angry with us? What if he takes revenge now that our father is gone?" So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, "Before your father died, he gave us this command. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When Joseph heard this message, he wept. His brothers then came and bowed down before him. They said, "We are your slaves." But Joseph comforted them with words of peace. He said, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." Joseph spoke kindly to them, and his brothers felt relief. The fear of punishment was replaced by the joy of forgiveness. The dream that once caused hatred was now fulfilled in reconciliation. Joseph's words show us something powerful. Even when others mean evil against us, God can turn it into good. His plan is greater than human jealousy, betrayal, or fear. Part 17. Joseph's Last Days. Joseph continued to live in Egypt with his family. He saw his children grow, and even his grandchildren sat on his knees. The land of Goshen was full of the people of Israel, who became more and more numerous. Joseph lived to be 110 years old. He was honored and respected, both by the Egyptians and by his own people. But even in his final days, Joseph never forgot the promises of God. Before his death, he gathered his brothers and their descendants. He said, "I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath. "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." This showed Joseph's deep faith. Even though he had lived most of his life in Egypt, his heart belonged to the land God had promised. He believed that one day his people would leave Egypt and return to Canaan. After Joseph's death, his body was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. But his story did not end there. Centuries later, when the Israelites left Egypt under Moses, they carried Joseph's bones with them, fulfilling the promise he had made them swear. Joseph's life is a story of betrayal, suffering, and injustice, yet also of faith, forgiveness, and victory. Through every step, God's hand guided him, turning pain into purpose and sorrow into salvation. Conclusion: the legacy of Joseph. The story of Joseph is more than history. It is a lesson for every generation. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave, and falsely accused. Yet through faith and patience, he rose to greatness. Joseph teaches us that even in the darkest times, God's plan is still at work. What others mean for harm, God can turn into good. His forgiveness healed his family, and his wisdom saved nations. Joseph's life reminds us, stay faithful, keep trusting, and never lose hope. Because the same God who guided Joseph still works in our lives today. Did this story touch your heart? Give this video a like to support the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of Joseph's journey inspired you the most? And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss more stories of faith, hope, and inspiration in English. Let Joseph's example remind us all, with faith, every trial can become a testimony.